Hey there, welcome back to Snail's story, where love isn't always loud, but it's always real. Today, we invite you into a story that begins with a lie, but ends with something truer than either of them expected. A shy seamstress who stood in for a friend, a billionaire CEO used to polished perfection, and a journey where fabric, forgiveness, and a thread of courage slowly stitched to lives together. If you've ever believed that love doesn't need to be perfect, just honest, this one's for you. And if it touches something in your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment letting us know where you're listening from. Now, let's begin. The Dovecote, a fine dating cafe tucked into the historic district, where warm amber lights draped from the ceiling. Hazelnut and vanilla mingled in the air, and soft jazz whispered through the speakers. At table 6, reserved in advance for Delilah Reed, heiress of Reed International, a real estate empire with dozens of properties along the East Coast. But the woman sitting at that table wasn't Delilah. She was Ray Bennett, a handmade dressmaker who lived off vintage clothing orders on Etsy and small repair jobs for elderly ladies in the neighborhood. She wore a buttercream linen dress she'd made herself, square neckline, puffed sleeves. Her hair was tied up with a wooden clip, her boots were scuffed at the soles, and her lips were bare. "I'm stuck in Switzerland. The chute's running." "Long, please, Ray. Just sit there, order a drink, say a few words, and leave. Don't do anything weird, okay?" Delilah had texted earlier that morning. Ray clenched her jaw and agreed. Not because she enjoyed this role-swapping game, a tit out of loyalty, and, perhaps, a tiny bit of curiosity. She adjusted the strap of her dress and sat down, just in time for the man to arrive. Cassian Wolf, no introduction needed. Ray knew exactly who he was, CEO of Wolf Ventures, once named one of Forbes' top 10 most eligible billionaires. Silver gray eyes, a perfectly pressed white shirt, a charcoal-tailored suit. His steps were calm, unhurried, but exuded authority. He looked at her, eyes scanning briefly with a hint of surprise before returning to a cool, unreadable expression. "Delilah Reed?" he asked, voice deep and steady. Ray swallowed. "Yes, nice to meet you." He nodded and pulled out the chair. Across from her, no handshake, no smile. Ray subtly tightened her grip on the hem of her dress. She knew this was insane, but he didn't, and she only had to pretend to be Delilah for 15 minutes. They ordered drinks. Ray went with a cappuccino. Because Delilah usually chose turmeric lattes, she didn't want to copy too exactly. Still working in the creative field? Cassian asked, gently stirring his coffee. Ray nodded, voice slightly hoarse. Yes. What kind of creative work? Design? Handmade? I make fashion. Sort of artisanal." Cassian paused. "Handmade. I mean artisanal, customized, one of a kind." He nodded again, and for a moment his eyes looked more intrigued than skeptical. "Interesting. Everyone I've met lately is talking about NFT investments or AI wardrobe systems." Ray smiled faintly. "I'm probably not. Like the people you usually meet? No, you're not." He said it plainly. But there was no judgment, just observation. Ray found herself quietly relieved. Maybe, if luck was on her side, she could pull this off. Cassian set down his cup and leaned back slightly. "I expected today to be like all the others, meeting another rich heiress, hearing stories about summer homes or horse stables. But you different?" Ray tilted her head, raising an eyebrow. "Not sure yet, but more interesting than expected." Ray flushed, unsure if it was a compliment or a cleverly disguised trap. She sipped her cappuccino, trying to sit like someone who belonged in this kind of date. The truth was, she didn't. She usually spent her days at her tiny shop on 7th Street, cutting fabric, mending sleeves, and hand-beating wedding gowns for strangers. "Do you go on these blind dates often?" Ray asked, trying to shift the focus. Cassian narrowed his eyes. No, I was forced into it. Same here. Not quite, he replied. You look like someone who, if left alone, would be doing something else entirely. Ray chuckled. Like sketching dress designs for dogs. You designed dog clothes. No, but now I'm thinking I should. Cassian shook his head, and for the first time his lips curved into an actual smile. The date was supposed to last just a few minutes. But an hour later, Ray glanced at her watch and shot up in panic. I have to go. I've got an order to deliver. Cassian stood as well, polite as ever. It was a pleasure meeting you, Delilah. Ray paused for a split second, then smiled and nodded. Likewise. She hurried out of the cafe, heart pounding. Barely believing everything had gone so smoothly, she didn't know that behind her, Cassian Wolf remained standing a moment longer, eyes fixed on her fading silhouette at the corner of the street, fingers brushing the rim of his coffee cup where the warmth of that curious little conversation still lingered. And Ray, who had only intended to play Delilah for a few minutes, had just left something behind in the billionaire's heart, something unexpectedly real. 3 days after that role-swapped date, Ray Bennett still couldn't shake the uneasy and oddly lingering feeling. She never thought a CEO whose $2 million cocktail parties could sit and talk with a thread-stained seamstress and even smile. It should have ended there, but the next morning, Delilah texted. Well, he texted .cassia, Wolf wants to see me again, so guess what? You have to play me one more time. Ray sat frozen on the floor, needle still in hand, a half-finished dress lying across her lap. Butter, her golden tabby, was sprawled out over a piece of white chiffon, softly snoring. Delilah, are you insane? Ray video called her, hair unbrushed. I already lied to him once. Do it again, and we're entering light fraud territory. And? What would you say to him? Hi, I'm not Delilah. I'm Ray, her seamstress bestie, standing in because she's stuck in Switzerland. Delilah shrugged, casually applying lipstick like this was just another Tuesday. I mean, no, but you did better than I expected. He didn't suspect a thing. You just need to meet him again. Say something very Delilah-esque. I'll send you a few sample conversations to practice. Ray sighed. Her heart was still tangled from the first meeting, from the smile Cassian gave, from the way he'd said, "You're more interesting than I expected," and because part of her wanted to see him again. Their second meeting was at a different place. Florent, a classic-style Italian restaurant with gray brick walls and fresh flowers that changed with the season. Ray arrived early, wearing her first-ever real cocktail dress, a sleek rice piece borrowed from Delilah. Form-fitting, simple yet refined. Her hair was softly curled, red lipstick, just as instructed. But the heels made her walk like a newborn. Penguin, Cassian Wolf, entered at exactly 7 p.m. This time, he wore a cream shirt, no tie. He looked less severe. Delilah. He nodded as he approached the table. Cassian. Ray replied, trying to keep her voice steady. He sat down, silver-gray eyes glancing at the menu, then at her. You don't look like you did last time, Ray. Hesitated for a beat. Because I wore linen that day. Because tonight, you look more like what I've been told about you. Ray's heart skipped. Cassian smiled slightly. But I like both versions. She exhaled in relief and quickly sipped her water. So no meetings tonight. Still had them. But not too many to miss dinner. He said it like dinner was something he rarely prioritized. Ray didn't know whether to feel honored or terrified. This wasn't just a courtesy meeting anymore. He was genuinely curious about her. They talked about art. Cassian asked Ray what she thought of AI-generated paintings. She told him she'd tried it before, but still preferred the human touch, like sewing, where every stitch could feel. Cassian studied her for a long moment. I'm not good with soft things. You just need to try. Ray smiled, unaware. Her voice had softened. Dinner ended with tiramisu and a glass of red wine. When Cassian walked Ray out, he didn't touch her, but his gaze had warmed. "I might text you soon," he said, "if you don't mind." Ray nodded. "I don't mind." But once home, she leaned against the door, her whole body trembling. She had just made a billionaire want to see her again. A week later, Cassian showed up at the Reed family atelier by invitation from Delilah. Ray panicked and begged Delilah to lend her the flagship store downtown, the one with sleek collections and polished staff who spoke fluent luxury. Ray hid behind the front counter, wearing a crisp white blouse, glasses, pretending to be Delilah. In work mode, Cassian stepped in, glancing around. "Your seamstress is quite talented," he remarked, eyeing a puff-sleeved lace dress on display. Ray stiffly smiled. "Thank you. I'm just the supervisor. Who designs them?" "Do?" Ray slipped. "I mean me and the design team." He looked at her, nodded slowly. "I haven't seen your name in any fashion press, because I prefer being behind the scenes." Cassian smiled. "That's where the real magic happens." Ray felt her heart slide out of place, but when Cassian left and Ray locked up the boutique, she leaned back against the glass door, fully aware this couldn't go on forever. Sooner or later, she'd have to confess. She wasn't Delilah. She was just a seamstress, living on the third floor of an old building and never meant to be part of his world. But the way he looked at her, it felt real enough that she began to wonder if he knew the truth, would he walk away or stay? Ray's tiny third-floor apartment in the old Waverly building had always been quiet, filled only with the hum of her sewing machine, the soft buzz of the radio, and the occasional grumble from Butter, her golden cat, when ignored. But this morning, everything turned chaotic. Ray's phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Messages, emails, blog alerts. "Your latest post is trending. That white lace dress is absolutely breathtaking. Who took that behind-the-scenes photo? It looks like something out of a magazine." Confused, Ray opened her personal blog, Thimble and Thread, where she quietly shared design sketches, old-school hand-stitching techniques, and photos of dresses she crafted in her modest home studio. A new post had just gone live overnight, scheduled days ago. She had completely forgotten it was about the bookstore wedding gown, a handmade bridal dress she'd designed, inspired by vintage novels. The photos were taken in her studio, with sunlight streaming through tall windows onto the delicate layers of chiffon. Usually, her blog drew just a few dozen readers, but this time thousands of views had flooded in. Because at the bottom of the post, she had unknowingly included a behind-the-scenes photo. No faces, just the silhouette of a man in a cream shirt holding a roll of white fabric. The caption read, "Borrowed a stranger's hands to hold the fabric. Somehow, he brought the dress to life." Ray hadn't expected the internet to work so fast. Someone recognized the limited edition Italian wristwatch on the man's arm, a model reportedly owned by only a handful of high-profile CEOs. Another commenter traced back the launch of Delilah, Reed's first fashion collection 3 years ago, confidently pointing out that Delilah hated sewing. And just like that, the rumors began to swirl. Is Delilah Reed secretly dating CEO Cassian Wolf? The mystery seamstress and the billionaire investor, a storybook romance. Who's really behind the blog Thimble and Thread? At Wolf Ventures headquarters, Cassian Wolf sat upright in his leather chair, eyes fixed on his computer screen. The blog post didn't mention his name, but the photo was undeniably him. There was no doubt. He remembered that evening in the atelier when Ray or Delilah had asked him to hold a piece of lace while she checked the lighting for a new design. She'd said she wanted to see sunlight pass through the fabric like in a fairy tale. Cassian had smiled, a rare occurrence, and now that moment was on the internet. But instead of anger, he sat in silence. Not because he was exposed, but because of one thing. Ray had written the post with a tone that didn't match a billionaire's heiress. It was the voice of someone who truly lived among pins and needles, who breathed each stitch and fabric fold. Something didn't add up. Ray received a text from Cassian at nearly 7 p.m. "Are you free for a drink? There's something I'd like to ask." Her heart dropped. Delilah was in Paris. There was no one else to play the part, no way to hide, and no way to keep pretending without feeling the guilt closing in. The bar was tucked inside a boutique hotel, dim lighting, soft music. Cocktails mixed like each drop was crafted by hand. Ray arrived in a simple long-sleeve black dress. Nothing fancy, but tailored to perfection. Because she'd made it herself, Cassian was already seated. As she walked in, his gaze wasn't cold like usual. It was searching. "Did you study dressmaking professionally?" he asked. Right after the hello, Ray hesitated. "No, I'm self-taught." "How did you manage that lace neckline without a zipper?" Ray opened her mouth, then closed it again. "You're not who I thought, Delilah." "Reed was," Cassian said quietly. His voice wasn't sharp, just a truth laid down, gently enough to make it sting. Ray looked up and met his eyes. "You've figured it out. I'm just missing confirmation." Silence. Then Ray nodded. "I'm Ray Bennett. I'm not Delilah. I live on the 3rd floor of the Waverly Building. I sew for a living, and I never should have gone to that first date." Cassian studied her for a long time. Ray barely dared to breathe. "You're not going to keep lying." "I'm tired," she whispered. "And you deserve the truth." Cassian took a sip of his drink, then set the glass down. "So now," his voice calm, steady, "are you going to leave like in those dramatic films? Stand up, apologize, and disappear?" "Maybe I should." Cassian nodded, like he'd already expected that. But as Ray stood, hands trembling from nerves, he added, "Ray." She stopped. "That white lace dress in the photo, it's the most beautiful design I've ever seen." Ray turned around and, for the first time that evening, she cried. Not much, just one tear, but it was real. Then she walked away, leaving behind a Cassian wolf who no longer knew whether to be angry or to hold on to the girl who had just stepped out of his life, carrying nothing but the truth. 3 days had passed since his last meeting with Ray, and Cassian Wolf still couldn't focus. Monday morning's board meeting went smoothly. He signed every document on time, approved a $3 million investment into a startup fund, and gave all the right nods at all the right times. But everyone could tell Cassian wasn't really in the room. He opened reports. He followed the discussion, but his eyes kept drifting unconsciously to his phone's dark screen, as if waiting for a message from someone. Of course, that message never came. Not a word from Ray. No apology, no explanation. But Cassian knew she didn't owe him anything more, because the one who stayed silent when he should have spoken was him that evening. Cassian left the office earlier than usual. As soon as he stepped into his luxury high-rise apartment overlooking the Hudson River, he saw his mother, Evelyn Wolf, sitting on the sofa, martini in hand, eyes glued to her iPad. "You're just in time," she said, not even looking up. "We need to talk." Cassian took off his coat, his voice dropping. "I thought you were still in Chicago. Flew back last night. The recent news made it impossible for me to stay put." He said nothing. Evelyn tapped the screen. "That blog post, the photo, the rumors. And now investors are discussing how you're dating a poor seamstress who pretended to be Delilah Reed." Cassian tightened his grip on his glass. "It has nothing to do with stock value, but everything to do with reputation." Evelyn finally looked up, her gaze cold as cut glass. "Cassian, our family can't afford to have some nobody dragging the Wolf name across headlines." "Oh, she didn't do anything wrong," he said slowly. "She impersonated someone else. lied to you through multiple dates, humiliated you in front of the entire investment world, and that's not wrong. I'm not saying it was right, but I understand why she did it. Evelyn set her glass down. Cassian, you have an entire legacy behind you. You're the sole heir. Every move you make represents a system, not just a passing feeling. Cassian met his mother's eyes. I didn't choose her because of a passing feeling, a seamstress. She raised an eyebrow. You could have anyone, the Landon girl, the McAllister girl. You've turned down every suitable match from powerful families only to fall for someone who has nothing but a needle and thread. Silence. Then Cassian spoke, almost in a whisper, because she's the first person who ever talked to me like I was just a person. Not a CEO, not a quarterly report, just a man. Evelyn pulled back slightly, as if she hadn't seen that emotion in her son for a very long time. I can't stop you from loving whoever you choose, she said, though her sharp tone quickly returned. But if you choose her, you'll lose my support and possibly the family councils. Cassian nodded. I understand. She stood, picked up her purse. Think carefully, Cassian. Not everyone has the privilege of carrying the Wolf name. That night, Cassian sat alone in the kitchen, a room he'd never really used. On the table was a small wooden box. Inside, it was a swatch of white lace Ray had once asked him to hold, saying, "Do you feel that? The stitches are as steady as a heartbeat." He picked it up, and for the first time, his own heart beat out of rhythm. Meanwhile, Ray hadn't stepped outside her workshop for a full week. The rumors hadn't stopped. A few fashion bloggers had reached out for interviews. Some comments called her a manipulative opportunist. Others labeled it a fake fairy tale. Delilah was still in Paris, unbothered, as if the world burning down had nothing to do with her. Well, it's out now. So what? You've got nothing to lose, Delilah had texted, along with a selfie from a fitting room. But Ray did have something to lose. Trust and the way he once looked at her. That look she feared she'd never see again. That evening, Ray posted a new blog entry. Just one sentence. Not everyone is born into your world, but that doesn't mean they can't walk into it with sincerity. No pictures, no names. But the one who needed to read it might just understand. The grand opening of Valeria Klein's fashion gallery was the kind of event that everyone in New York high society had to attend, or at least be invited to. Camera flashes lit up endlessly across the Art Deco backdrop, printed with Valeria's name, her initials VK cleverly woven into the pattern. Everyone knew Valeria wasn't just a designer, she was an icon. An icon of elegance, influence, and Cassian Wolf's longtime ex. That night, Cassian showed up with his mother. He hadn't planned to attend, but Evelyn had said, "You need to remember who you are, and who stood beside you for 6 years." Cassian said nothing. He was too tired to argue. Valeria spotted him the moment he walked into the main hall. She smiled faintly, her sharp gaze gliding over his suit and stance. Cassian Wolf. She approached, her heels tapping a slow rhythm across the marble floor. Long time, Valeria. Still as polite as ever, she tilted her head. "I heard about your little scandal. That girl quite bold." Cassian didn't respond. Valeria sipped her wine, eyes narrowing. "I never thought you would get caught up in a stunt like that, especially with someone who has no real background." She wasn't pretending for money or fame, Cassian said quietly, finally meeting her eyes. She just didn't know how to escape the situation she got pulled into. Valeria's lips curled. "And you let yourself get pulled in willingly, I assume." He didn't deny it. Valeria placed her glass down on the crystal table. "Cassian, I know you better than you know yourself, and I know you hate things you can't control. Maybe I'm learning how not to." With a seamstress. He didn't answer. Valeria smiled, then walked away, but not before leaving behind a parting line sharp as glass. Be careful, people who don't belong in this world rarely stay for long. That same evening, Ray received an email from an unknown address, no name. No subject line, just a single sentence and a link to a video clip from Valeria's launch event. He didn't go with you. He went with someone who truly belongs. Ray clicked play. In the video, Cassian stood beside Valeria and his mother. The three of them spoke like old friends, surrounded by cameras and soft laughter from elegant guests. Valeria leaned in and said something in his ear. He smiled, not intimately, but not distant either. Ray closed the laptop, turned off the lights. She didn't cry, just felt something hollow open up inside her, quiet and stretching, like a seam left unfinished. The next morning, Ray arrived early at the atelier. She began dismantling a wedding gown she'd been working on, a special order from a bride, who wanted the entire dress made of hand-stitched lace, with both names embroidered on the lining. Ray moved her needle slowly, her thoughts tangled. The seamstress, the imposter, not in the same league. All the whispers from social media, from Valeria, from Cassian's mother blurred into one unshakable voice. You don't belong there. That afternoon, Ray sent an email to the local charity where she'd once volunteered teaching sewing to kids in the summer, asking if she could return, not because she needed validation, but because in that small room filled with bright-eyed children and mini sewing machines, no one asked what brand she wore. No one addressed her by the name of a corporation. All they needed were thread, fabric, and two hands that knew how to mend. Friday noon in Manhattan, a soft drizzle hung in the air. Ray stood under the awning of the bakery on 23rd Street, holding a box of cupcakes she planned to bring to the sewing class that afternoon. She watched people rush past. Her heart hollowed it. Had been 10 days since she told Cassian the truth, and still not a single message from him. She figured maybe that was fair. He had no reason to come looking for the girl who'd humiliated him in front of the world, who gave his mother and ex-girlfriend ammunition, and who left a scratch on the image of his perfect reputation. Ray adjusted the cupcake box in her arms, preparing to cross the street when a familiar luxury car stopped right in front of her. The door opened and out stepped Delilah Reed, the last person Ray expected or wanted to see today. Get in, Delilah said. No greeting, no small talk. No, Ray replied, stepping back. I don't want to cause more trouble. You're standing in the rain with cupcakes for a bunch of kids. I'm the trouble here, not you. Now get in. Ray looked into her eyes, the eyes of a girl once spoiled by privilege, but never lacking depth. She sighed and got in. The Range Rover pulled into a sleek fashion studio where Delilah was in the middle of a shoot for her upcoming collection. Without any preamble, she tossed an iPad into Ray's lap. On the screen was a draft Instagram post. It's from Delilah's personal account with nearly 4 million followers. Sometimes your best friend asks for a tiny favor, like attending a coffee date in her place, saying a few lines. But that tiny favor becomes a storm. So, to calm this storm, let me say it clearly. Ray Bennett is not a liar. She stood in for me because I asked her to. She didn't take anything from anyone. She simply helped a friend who was too afraid to show up. It all started with me, and if anyone's got stones to throw them at me first. Ray stared at the screen, stunned. Delilah crossed her arms, leaning against the table. I'm tired. Tired of letting you take the fall for something I started while I hid in Paris like it wasn't my mess. Delilah, don't thank me. I'm 10 days late doing the right thing. That doesn't deserve a pat on the back. Ray bit her lip. No matter what you say, the world still sees me as someone who reached too far. Then let me fall with you, Delilah smirked. Maybe I'll drag a few tabloids down with me. I'm setting up an interview. I'll tell everything. Number? Spin. Ray clenched her fists. I don't want to ruin your career. Delilah looked at her, and for the first time, her eyes were genuinely soft. Ray, I can restart my career any time, but you only get one chance to hold on to something that truly makes your heart race. Ray stayed silent. Delilah said quietly, and I think that something or someone might just need a little push too. That afternoon at the community sewing class, Ray was helping a little girl stitch the edge of a tote bag when a tiny hand tugged at her sleeve. Miss Ray, the girl whispered, wide-eyed. Are you the lady from the news? Ray froze. I saw a picture of you and that handsome man. My mom said you're the brave seamstress. Ray smiled, her throat tightening. You think I'm really brave? Yes, the girl nodded. Because you keep coming here to teach us, no matter what anyone says. Meanwhile, at Wolf Ventures, Cassian was reviewing contracts when his assistant knocked on the door. There's a post going viral, sir. Cassian looked up. On the screen was Delilah. Reed's statement, clear, unapologetic, entirely honest. He read it once, then again, and without a word. He rose from his chair, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the office, heading to the only place. He knew where he might find the girl still quietly stitching together the pieces of something he had broken. Saturday evening, the lights were still on at Community Center 8, inside a small room on the second floor. Ray was cleaning up scraps of fabric after her sewing class. The kids' little tote bags were still unfinished, just a few shaky stitches. The words, "Hi, Mom," tilted and uneven, but Ray felt a quiet calm settle over her heart. At least here, she knew she was useful, even if only in a small way. The door creaked open. Ray looked up, Cassian. Wolf, not in his usual dark suit. Not with his CEO posture. Tonight, he wore a simple shirt and jeans, hair slightly tousled, holding a small box wrapped in brown craft paper. He looked almost ordinary. Her heart skipped, then beat faster. I didn't think you'd still be here this late, Cassian said, his voice softer than usual. I was cleaning up after class. Ray replied awkwardly. He nodded. Silence stretched between them. No, I'm sorry. No explanations. He simply held out the box. I didn't know what to get you. So I went to that bakery you mentioned once. They said you usually order the garlic butter rolls. Ray took the box. It was still warm. The scent of butter and garlic felt oddly comforting. Something real. I read Delilah's post, Cassian said slowly. And I know I've been far too silent. You had every right to be. Ray looked down. I was pretending to be someone I'm not, no matter the reason. I didn't come here to sort right from wrong, he said, his eyes tired but sincere. I came because for the first time in years, I stepped outside of what was scripted, and I don't want to step back in. Ray's hands trembled. Cassian, I don't know if you'll ever forgive me. But if you'll let me, just for one evening, I want to listen about why you prefer linen over cotton, about the kids you teach, about why you named your handmade shop. Thread and soul. Ray looked at him, unsure how to respond in the dim amber light. Cassian was no longer the cold billionaire, not the man who once walked away without a word. He was someone learning to knock. Instead of barging in, that night they sat together on the wooden bench behind the center. Ray spoke slowly, gently about her mother, the one who taught her how to stitch and always said, "Nothing's too torn to fix, as long as you have the patience to mend it." She talked about how she once dreamed of launching her own label, but gave it up because she didn't think she was fashion enough. About how the spotlight around Cassian felt too bright and she was nothing but a small, flickering desk lamp. Cassian didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix. He just listened, and finally, when Ray asked, barely audible, "Do you believe someone like me belongs in your world?" He shook his head gently. Ray nodded. as if accepting that truth. But then he added, I don't need someone who fits into my world. I want someone who makes me want to change the world I live in. One sentence, quiet, simple, but to Ray. It was like flipping a switch in her heart, the same one she'd shut off long ago. After being turned away by too many closed doors, that night when Cassian walked Ray back to her little tailor shop, he didn't ask to come in, he simply stood at the door, silent for a few seconds. I have to fly to Milan tomorrow, he said. Just for 2 days. But when I get back, if you haven't locked your heart yet, let me knock again. Ray smiled and for the first time didn't look away. I'll leave the light on, she said. Just a desk lamp, but bright enough for someone to find their way back. Sunday afternoon at the Regent Hotel courtyard, where wolf groups fall. Fashion showcase was underway. Guests buzzed through the marble halls, cameras flashing non-stop. And every spotlight pointed toward the glass runway at the center. Delilah Reed arrived as a special guest, still carrying the air of a millionaire's daughter. But this time, she wasn't alone. She walked in holding Ray's hand, the girl in a soft beige linen dress she had sewn herself. No bold makeup, no fancy labels, but eyes calm, steady, like someone who had learned to stand tall in a world that once only looked at her with half a glance. Don't say anything, Delilah murmured, tilting her head. I fought with my mother all morning to drag you here. Don't make me regret it. Ray smiled, a blend of gratitude and quiet fear. What if he doesn't say anything? Delilah shrugged. Then we go eat cake. I'll order double cheese for both of us. As the show neared its end, the main MC invited Cassian Wolf to the stage, the customary closing speech. But what followed, no one saw coming. Cassian stepped up, elegant as ever, in a tailored suit, but this time without his usual stack of slides or business forecasts. He stood at the center of the stage, looked out at the crowd, and began with a line that wasn't in any script. I have a public apology to make in front of the fashion world, the press, and everyone still asking, who is she? The room fell silent. Cassian continued. Last week, I met a woman under the name Delilah Reed. But later, I found out her real name was Ray Bennett. She's not a fashion heiress. She has no collection to her name, no PR connections, but she's the one who made me realize how long I've lived inside a gilded cage without even knowing I was the one holding the key. Camera shutters began snapping furiously. Ray Bennett didn't want anything from me. She didn't apologize. For being herself, she just was. And in that honesty, she taught me courage. He extended a hand toward the audience. If Ray is here tonight, hope you'll come up, not to explain yourself, but to let me stand beside the woman who dared to live truthfully, even when the whole world misunderstood her. In the crowd, Ray froze. Delilah gave her a nudge. Go, or I swear I'll lift your hemline and go up there for you. Ray's hands trembled, but she walked step by step into the light, wearing low heels, in a dress stitched by her own hands, every seam, telling stories of wounds, of quiet days, of all the times she was told no. She stepped onto the stage, stood beside Cassian. She didn't speak. She simply smiled, and he took her hand without hesitation. The next day, headlines blazed across every media outlet. Billionaire Cassian Wolf publicly affirms relationship with Seamstress at major industry event. Once called a fake heiress, she now stands on fashion's most elite stage. Ray chuckled, shaking her head as Delilah forwarded the articles. We're trending again. She sighed. This time, it's the good kind, Delilah replied. And next time I wear something from Thread and Soul, you better give me a discount. Ray stared at the screen, heart light as air. At last, the name Ray Bennett no longer needed to hide behind anyone else's. Wednesday afternoon, Ray was adjusting the Thread and Soul outside her little shop when a sleek black car pulled up in front. The window rolled down. A woman stepped out, ivory bodycon dress, tan trench coat, pointed heels, and oversized Dior sunglasses. Every step she took sliced through the air, sharp and intentional. "Are you Ray Bennett?" the woman asked. Her smile tilted, but her eyes didn't smile at all. Double quotes, "Yes, and you are." "I'm Vivian Hartley." She extended a hand. "Cashin's ex." No further explanation was needed. Ray could hear the intent in every word, a tone both taunting and probing. "He seems to have new tastes." Vivian glanced around. The shop pausing at a stack of slightly crooked fabric bolts. "Quite different from the old days." "There's nothing official between us," Ray replied softly. "Really?" Vivian raised an eyebrow. "Then you won't mind if I try to rekindle something?" Ray's fingers curled around the edge of her cutting table. "That's up to him." Vivian smiled, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who always played to win. She exited the store like she had just planted a ticking time bomb. That night, Cassian showed up, no warning. Ray was still sewing a small linen dress for one of the girls in her charity class. When she saw him, she simply said, "Your ex came to see me." Cassian froze. What did she say? That she wants you back. And I should step aside. He stepped forward, sitting down beside her work table. His voice was calm, but his eyes were slightly red. "Vivian was someone my parents adored. She had it all: status, education, looks, and pride. So why did you break up?" Ray asked quietly. "Because she loved the image of Cassian Wolf, the CEO, not the man underneath. When I wanted to take 3 months off to care for my dad during chemo," she said, "if you missed the Alistair deal, don't expect to come back." Ray stayed silent. Her hands stopped sewing. "You have every right to walk away," Cassian said, voice low. "I'd understand because you didn't ask for any of this. You didn't choose the spotlight or the noise." "I'm not afraid of the noise," Ray replied, meeting his eyes. "I'm just afraid of being the temporary choice." Her words struck him like a blade to the chest. He instinctively reached for her hand. "You're not a temporary choice. I'm building something real for the first time." "Then prove it," Ray said softly. "Because she's planting doubts I don't want to believe, but I'm not strong enough to silence them alone." 3 days later, on Cashin's personal Instagram, where he rarely posted anything outside of work, a new post appeared. Photo: a delicate ring resting on a piece of hand-stitched beige linen with soft lace trim. Caption: "I used to choose from a checklist. This time, I'm choosing from the heart. And this ring isn't for anyone in the old contact list. It's for the one who left the light on so I could find my way back." In the comments, Delilah chimed in, finally doing something right. Amen. Ray saw the post while standing in her sewing class. The kids gathered around her screen, squealing. "Miss Ray, are you getting married?" Ray just smiled. She didn't nod, she didn't shake her head, but it was the smile of someone who had finally put down the umbrella and walked into the rain. No longer. That day, Ray received a package with no sender's name. Inside was a roll of soft, milk-white linen, luxurious, expensive fabric. But along its edge were hand-sewn stitches in pale pink thread, the exact thread Ray used in her charity sewing classes. Folded neatly inside the linen was a small card. "That day, you said, act. I've thought about it for a long time. I've decided to act in your language. Please open the shop at 7 p.m. tonight. Just come. You don't have to say anything at all. See asterisk at 6:59. Ray stood in front of thread and sole. Her fingers trembled slightly around the ring of keys. When she turned the lock, every light inside the shop came on. Not the fluorescent ones, but warm string lights wrapped around each shelf of fabric. Every hanger, Every window pane at the center of the shop where Ray usually placed her large cutting table stood a small wooden platform draped in white cloth. On top, a round velvet box. Inside, a ring, and standing beside it, waiting, was Cassian Wolf. No suit, no tie, just a white shirt, khakis, and an apron embroidered with thread and soul. Ray nearly burst out laughing. "You look like a new kid who got dropped into a home SE class, and very proud to be here," he replied. "I used to think power meant standing on big stages, but maybe it just means being brave enough to stand in front of you." He stepped forward, slowly lowered to one knee. "Ray Bennett, you are not the easy choice. You don't fit the pedigree, the press, or the preconceptions. But you fit me like the perfect thread, the right size, right color, right strength. To mend the part of my life I thought no one saw. Please don't stitch that wedding dress alone. Let me stitch it with you, with every part of the life we have left." Ray stood still. She didn't cry. She simply took a step back, then forward, and wrapped her arms around him. A hug that held years of waiting, of doubts and bruises, but also, finally, the courage to believe that love doesn't ask you to become someone else. It just asks you to come as you are. 3 months later, Thread and Soul closed for a week for interior upgrades. But everyone on the street already knew Miss Ray's marrying that billionaire wolf guy, and Ray still wore linen dresses. Cassian was still a CEO, but stopped by the charity sewing class every week, and the wedding. Not in a fancy hotel, but in the backyard of Thread and Soul, with a white fabric canopy, hanging paper lanterns, and a matcha cake baked by hand by Delilah for the first and probably last time ever. "You know something," Cassian whispered as they lit candles that night. "I used to think love meant choosing the right person." Ray laughed. "Doesn't it?" "No, it means choosing wrong over and over until you realize who you can't lose, even if it means giving up everything you once thought mattered." And that's how they got married. Not because of who she was, but because, with her, he could finally be who he truly was. Sometimes, love isn't about finding someone who fits perfectly into your world. It's about finding the person who makes you want to change that world so it finally fits the both of you. Ray never had to pretend to be anyone else again. And Cassian finally found a place where power wasn't measured in deals or titles, but in the quiet courage to stay. Thank you for staying with us until the very last stitch of this story. If it warmed your heart even a little, give it a like, hit subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, because somewhere out there, someone might need this reminder today. Until next time. This is Snail's story, where love takes its time but always finds its way home.